about the other schools and degree programs that are on campus and how much interaction you have with those other disciplines or the things that other students are learning, and what cross subject matter types of things you're seeing.
Right.
Are you seeing this program or this program doing a lot more collaboration than another?
Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, first it's a modern campus, so everybody talks to everybody. We're all in the same quad. You know, you run into everyone at the cafeteria and those sorts of things. So there's little bits of collaboration that'll happen on a campus like that, just kind of all over the place, just by the magic of being a university. We're in the College of Computing, which means we sit right next to computer science and software engineering and security and information technology and some of these groups. And so we have a pretty high degree of interaction with them, just both by virtue of being in the same physical building, and also a lot of related subject matter, right? So, you know, you're going to build a large-scale database server. Well, we're going to use it for a massively multiplayer game, and somebody else is going to use it for something else. But you know, some of that technology is the same, and it overlaps, and so we collaborate on those kinds of things. We also collaborate a lot with the art school, obviously. I mean, that's a pretty obvious one. We collaborate a fair degree with engineering, and in particular industrial design. We did a couple projects where we actually built, did a neat project where we built a controller, a handheld game and controller set for a young man who was legally blind. And so, you know, figuring out the optics, figuring out the form factor and all of that kind of stuff was really a lot of fun. We've worked a lot with the digital humanities groups in talking about culture and media and adoption and those kinds of things. The number one major, since we started our degree programs, now the number one minor on campus is in Japanese.
Wow.
So it's sort of, you know, these are the kinds of connections that get made in a campus like that where, you know, I think everybody was expecting everyone to like minor in physics because, you know, we're going to build really serious, but no, we're going to minor in Japanese so that we understand more about that culture and its influence on the games industry and those kinds of issues. So
that's something that just organically happened.
Yeah.
And tell me about the ability for that type of organic development to be brought into what the university is doing, compared to, you know, the old bureaucratic, old structure models where it's hard to bring in change.
Right.
What's RIT like?
RIT is, I mean, any institution is a mix, right?
Sure.
Any large organization has its barriers, has its social norms, has its policies and procedures that preclude you from actually, you know, doing what you want to do in the most efficient way possible. But that said, there is an ethic to RIT that is about building things, right? It's about understanding things by building things. And so there is a very wide acceptance to saying, okay, I want to know more about something, therefore I am going to make a thing. I'm going to construct a thing. I'm going to try something. There's an experimental culture there, just as there is in game players, right? That is, you know, it's not completely risk-free. You know, there's a little bit of risk aversion, as there is in any organization. But there is a cultural acceptance that we're going to build lots of things, and some of them will turn out to be good things, and some of them will turn out to be okay, and some of them are going to fall on their face, and that's okay. And I think that culture is probably why you saw a games education group spring up at RIT before they were at most places. Mm-hmm. RIT has a history of firsts. Right? First information technology program, first software engineering program, you know, one of the first imaging science programs, one of the first photo schools. So it's just, there's this ability that says it's okay to be out there. It's okay to be trying something different. And sometimes it works to our advantage.
Well, another thing that I think they were a first on is this incorporation of the National Technical Institute for the Deaf on campus, which is inclusion. And you don't see that type of inclusion for a demographic with a disability to that level that's there on campus. And
yeah, it becomes more than an inclusion. It becomes immersion, right?
Oh,
and
it really
so it transforms a lot of the culture of what happens on campus. Absolutely.
And I realize I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but what's your exposure been to any of the deaf students and any of their support services? And
I mean, I've taught many classes in which we've had deaf students and interpreters and all of that. And oftentimes in the types of classes that we'll teach, we run up against something that has never really been taught before in those kinds of things. And so, you know, I can remember early on going through, you know, sitting down with interpreters ahead of the class trying to figure out, well, what's the best way to actually get through a lecture when half the lecture is talking about source code. And that was a very strange thing, you know, at that point that we were looking at. And I will say that several of the deaf students that I've worked with have been fantastic. They are every bit as driven and sometimes even more driven than the other students you're working with. They're very social. And they're very collaborative, and because of that immersion that happens at RIT, there's an acceptance factor that I think you wouldn't see some other places. And so, you know, we've had students on team projects and, you know, all of that kind of stuff where things have actually been really smooth, smoother than you would expect, given all of the resources and all the support that they have on campus.
so if we look at creating in the world a talent integration ecosystem, where we're looking to kind of move some of the great things that have happened at RIT as a model and move that out into the larger physical world and go into communities and cities and regions and look at, okay, what can we do here to foster some of the great things that you've created models of at RIT? Any input and thought there?
The way I usually want to think about it is I usually want to think that, well, of course, everybody wants to do great and wonderful things, right? And everybody wants to have all the success in the world and do these things. And so I start thinking in terms of barriers. I start thinking in terms of like, okay, well, what's keeping us from doing that and how can we come at that, right? And so I look at it and I think, well, so one barrier is a lot of what we've done at RIT is really community-centric, right? We have to understand the community that we have. We have to understand our students, understand our campus, understand our environment, understand its norms and its values and all those kinds of things. And so you wind up doing lots of things in which you need a person or a game designer or a facilitator that's in part kind of a community manager, right? And that's not a position that a lot of organizations think they need. I'm almost coming to the opinion that probably every organization needs exactly that. But there's that, you know, how do we talk about the culture of a given institution, and how do we talk about the culture of a given organization in a way that makes sense to the people that are a part of it? And so what's not going to translate is picking up what we've done at RIT and dropping it in another institution that's wholly culturally different than RIT. But what is going to translate is understanding the importance of all of the stuff that we did at RIT relative to its culture, and then trying to do something somewhere else relative to its culture. So that's a big part of it. I think the second largest barrier that I see is the assessment trap. Right? So the assessment trap goes something like this. So I want to make a game that has an impact on, I don't know, elementary math, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that game, and I'm going to pour my heart and sweat and soul into trying to, you know, do this. But the way I'm going to assess it is I'm going to say, well, so this is what we did before the game. And now I'm going to take the same assessment measure that I used at the end, like my multiple choice test or whatever it is, and then I'm going to look for improvement on that same scale because I introduced this new way of coming at things, right? And it turns out that when you do that, you wind up making a game that's really, really good at teaching a student to take a multiple choice test. It has nothing to do with whether or not you're actually impacting math, right? And so there's that sort of, if you want to come at this, you have to go deep. You can't just sort of shallowly assess whether or not something is effective. And that's the second barrier, because I think a lot of people are tied up right now in terms of resources, in terms of funding, in terms of legitimacy, in terms of opportunity, in whether or not this is going to improve relative to the assessment measures that we used when we were looking backwards instead of looking forwards.
So, and just kind of honoring the truth and the largeness of what you just touched on. I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg, the assessment thing there.
Right.
And all of education and some of our biggest challenges today. Honoring that, if you could break that barrier down and take one step, a first step.
A first step. I think the first step is probably to, find a way to interject a little bit of chaos into whatever it is your organization is doing. Find out whatever percentage it is that you can devote to trying the new thing, to trying what you think is going to come next, right? We talk, it's really strange when you think about it. A K-12 school doesn't have an R&D department in terms of its own teaching, right? So there's that notion of what percentage of your time are you spending currently delivering production, and what percentage of your time are you spending thinking about what you're going to do next. And whatever that percentage is, even if it's relatively small, given your production constraints, at least understanding that and recognizing it and valuing it is a first step in the right direction. It's thinking outside your current set of problems.